You know what you believe, you know what you want, and yet sometimes you find yourself doing exactly the opposite. Why do we do that? Why do we stay in situations we know aren't right for us? Why do we make choices that don't fit with what we believe? There's a fascinating psychological reason behind this. And once you understand it, you may start seeing some of your own patterns differently. Hi, I'm Latha Krishna, and you're listening to Unspoken Patterns, a podcast about the little things we do, think, and feel without always understanding why. Because sometimes the patterns that shape our lives are the ones we don't even notice. If you enjoy conversations that make you pause and look at yourself a little differently, subscribe to Unspoken Patterns and join me here. About a week ago, I had this nagging headache. Nothing dramatic, just one of those dull, annoying aches that hangs around and refuses to leave. I tried to sleep it off, but I kept tossing and turning. I couldn't sleep. So at around 2 a.m., I reached for my phone and I typed into Google, causes for persistent headache. And then I went into WebMD. Now, for those who haven't used WebMD, let me explain. WebMD has this almost magical ability to make you believe that a sneeze could mean tuberculosis and a stubbed toe could be cancer. 5 minutes into reading, I was wide awake. I was lying in an air-conditioned room and somehow I was sweating. Because according to my very thorough late-night medical investigation, I was no longer dealing with a headache. I was apparently suffering from some rare neurological condition that, in my imagination, was probably found only in some Amazonian tree frogs. My mind had gone into full-scale disaster mode. And here's the interesting part. A part of me knew this was irrational. I knew I was probably just dehydrated or overtired. But that tiny whisper of doubt, well, it ran wild and hijacked my common sense. Eventually, I told myself, stop it, that's enough. I gulped down half a bottle of water, and then, almost as a way of making sense of the whole thing, another thought came in. Maybe I'm stressed. I've been procrastinating. I've got things I haven't been dealing with. Maybe all this pressure is catching up with me. Maybe it's time I stopped avoiding certain things and started facing it. And I went to sleep. The next morning, the headache was gone. But something about that night stayed with me. No, not the headache. It was the sheer speed with which my brain had taken one ordinary symptom and constructed an entire medical thriller larger than an IMAX screen. And what fascinated me even more was this. I believed my own internal narrator as if she were a veteran doctor. For those few minutes, my brain sounded more convincing than my common sense. That moment of contradiction, the uncomfortable tension between how I see myself and how I actually reacted, made me think of something psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Because suddenly I had two versions of myself in the same room. One saying, I'm a rational person, and the other saying, yes, but you just went into catastrophic thinking and spent 20 minutes convincing yourself you have a brain parasite. I trusted my panic-fueled imagination while holding on to a belief that I am usually rational. This clash between seeing myself as logical and catching myself in full-blown catastrophic thinking mode bothered me big time. That gap was uncomfortable. That's an example of cognitive dissonance. It's that psychological discomfort we experience when two things we believe, think, feel, or do don't fit comfortably together. And our minds don't particularly like that discomfort. So what do? We try to get rid of it. And this is where it gets really interesting. To ease this discomfort, we don't always change our behavior. To fill this gap between uncertainty and control, sometimes we simply change the story we tell ourselves about the behavior by rewriting the narrative to make everything feel consistent again. Let's go back to my headache. There were several things happening simultaneously. 1, I had a belief I'm a rational person, headaches are usually harmless. 2, there was my behavior. I was searching medical websites at 2 a.m. 3, there was my emotional reaction. I was terrified despite knowing I was probably overreacting. 4, there was the uncomfortable contradiction. If I'm so rational, why am I behaving like this? My brain wanted an explanation, and I could have resolved that discomfort in several different ways. The first way, I could have blamed myself and said, I always overreact. I can't even trust my own instincts. That sounds like self-awareness, but it isn't necessarily. Sometimes self-criticism is simply another way of avoiding the real issue. Because instead of asking, what happened to me, I'm saying, what's wrong with me? There's a huge difference. One invites curiosity, the other creates shame. And if I repeatedly explain my behavior by telling myself that I am flawed, weak, irrational, or incapable, I may preserve my self-image as a rational person, but at the cost of my self-confidence. For eventually, I begin to mistrust myself. And ironically, that can make anxiety worse. The second way, the denial route. I tell myself in the morning, it was no big deal. I was just browsing through a few websites. I didn't panic. Before you realize it, you have rewritten the story. You downplay what happened to avoid facing the contradiction. This might calm you down in the moment, but in the long run, it's like stuffing all your emotions in a drawer and slamming it shut. Now that drawer fills up fast. So what happens when it bursts open? The cycle starts all over again. The third way, blame somebody else. I could have said, well, WebMD is ridiculous. They make everything sound serious. Anyone would have panicked. And there is some truth in it. Medical websites can certainly fuel health anxiety. But if every time I react emotionally, I find someone or something outside myself to blame and never get to examine my own reaction. The website made me panic. My colleague made me angry. My partner made me insecure. My boss made me lose my temper. My family made me feel inadequate. Sometimes those things really do influence us. But if the explanation is always outside us, we lose the opportunity to ask, why did this affect me so strongly? That's when growth stops. And then there's the fourth possibility, the one which is actually useful. I could pause and ask myself, wait, why did I panic? I must have been stressed. I've been avoiding stuff. Maybe I've been carrying more pressure than I realized. Maybe the headache wasn't the whole story. Maybe my mind was already looking for somewhere to put all that anxiety. Here, you're being honest with yourself without tearing yourself down. Instead of blaming yourself with what's wrong with me, or denying the event, or blaming others, you chose to focus on the why. You see the full picture. You not only admit the logic lapse, but also acknowledge what was beneath the lapse. Stress, burnout, maybe even fear. And in doing that, you held on to your identity as a logical person without ignoring the emotional part of you. That's just human after all. That's a much healthier resolution. It's reflection plus personal accountability. And this happens to us in a much bigger way than a 2 a.m. WebMD search. Think about someone who says, I'm a very independent person. I don't need anybody. But secretly feels lonely and desperately wants connection. There's a contradiction. So instead of admitting, actually, I do need people, they might tell themselves, I prefer being alone anyway. The story protects the self-image. Or think about someone who prides themselves on being generous. They give and give and give, and then one day they feel resentful because nobody seems to appreciate them. Instead of asking, why am I giving so much when I actually don't want to? They might say, people are so ungrateful. Again, there may be some truth in that, but perhaps there's another truth underneath it. I keep saying yes when I want to say no, and then I expect people to somehow know what I need. That's an uncomfortable realization, but it's useful. And here's another one that I think many of us will recognize. We tell ourselves, I don't care what people think about me. And then someone doesn't like something we posted, we say, I really don't care. And then we check their reaction 3 more times. We tell ourselves, their opinion doesn't matter. But we're still thinking about it at midnight. Now there's dissonance. The self-image says, I'm completely unaffected by other people's opinions. But the behavior says, I'm very affected by this person's opinion. And the mind has a choice. It can say, oh, they're just jealous, or social media is toxic, or I don't care. Or it can say, actually, I think I do care more than I want to admit it. That last sentence is uncomfortable, but it's honest. And honesty is often where change begins. Well, think about someone who says, I would never stay in a toxic relationship. And then they find themselves staying in one. That's incredibly uncomfortable. So the mind may start rewriting the story. It's not that bad. They are under a lot of pressure. They really love me. Every relationship has problems. Maybe some of these things are true, but sometimes the story is doing another job. It's helping us live with the contradiction in our own mind. The fact that we know that the relationship is hurting us, and yet we choose to stay. In other words, we are doing something that goes against what we believe we should be doing. This is one of the reasons cognitive dissonance is so fascinating. We aren't necessarily lying to ourselves. The mind is trying to reduce psychological discomfort. Our minds don't just want to feel that we are right. They want our behavior to make sense with the person we believe ourselves to be. And when there's a mismatch, that discomfort can be difficult to sit with. So what do? Ideally, we change the behavior. But that's often the harder choice. More often, we find a way to explain the behavior so that it still fits with what we believe about ourselves. So we change the story around it. It's not really that bad. Things will change. They do love me, I'm staying because I want to make this work. The belief stays intact. The story changes to make our behavior fit the belief. Now, I don't think the lesson here is our brains are lying to us. That's too simplistic. Our brains are constantly trying to protect us from psychological discomfort. Sometimes that protection is useful, sometimes it isn't. The real skill is learning to notice when you're creating a story simply because the truth is uncomfortable. Because the most dangerous stories aren't necessarily the obvious lies. They are the stories that contain just enough truth to make us believe them. My boss is impossible. Maybe. My partner doesn't understand me. Maybe. People are selfish. Well, sometimes they are. I'm just not good at relationships. Perhaps true. But before we settle on the story, we can ask, what part of this is actually true? What part am I adding because it makes me feel better? What part am I avoiding because it makes me uncomfortable? And perhaps the most important question, what does this say about me that I don't particularly want to know? Because that's where cognitive dissonance can become useful. It becomes a signal, not an enemy. It tells us something doesn't quite add up here. And instead of immediately fixing the discomfort with a story, we can pause. We can get curious. Maybe I really am angry. Maybe I really do need help. Maybe I actually am lonely. Maybe I care more than I admit. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I stayed too long. Maybe I said yes because I was afraid to say no. Maybe I'm not as rational as I like to think I am. And that's okay. Because being human means that sometimes our emotions will outrun our logic. Sometimes fear will make decisions before reason catches up. Sometimes we'll behave in ways that don't fit the person we think we are. The goal isn't to become someone who never contradicts themselves. That's impossible. The goal is to become someone who can notice the contradiction without immediately needing to defend themselves against it. That's emotional maturity. You don't have to say, I'm a terrible person because I behaved badly. You don't have to say, I didn't behave badly at all. And you don't have to say, someone else made me do it. You can simply say, I did that. I don't particularly like why I did it. So let me try and understand it. That's the space between reacting and responding. And perhaps that's where real change begins. So the next time you catch yourself doing something that doesn't fit the person you believe you are, don't rush to explain it away. Don't shame yourself. Don't deny it. Don't immediately blame someone else. Pause and ask, what story am I telling myself to make this behavior feel okay? Because sometimes the story is protecting you, and sometimes the story is exactly what's keeping you stuck. And that, I think, is the fascinating thing about the human mind. It doesn't just tell us stories, it tells us stories we are very, very willing to believe.